I am a massive fan of Quentin Tarantino, some of my favorite films being Reservoir Dogs and Kill Bill Volume 1, but Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is unquestionably my favorite film of his, as well as, in my opinion, one of the greatest pictures of the last decade or so. The cast is unfathomably impressive, consisting of Leonardo DiCaprio in his funniest role to date, Brad Pitt, the film's release year, 2019, basically belonging to Pitt, following two excellent performances, in this movie of course, as well as in the underrated sci-fi spectacle Ad Astra. The masterful mega-talent Margot Robbie, the legendary Al Pacino, Kurt Russell, Dakota Fanning, Austin Butler, Timothy Olyphant, Bruce Dern, Margaret Qualley, and the late Luke Perry. The soundtrack is unsurprisingly impeccable, featuring such classic artists as Simon and Garfunkel, Neil Diamond, and Joni Mitchell, and the Tarantino edit of Keep Me Hanging On is memorable and magnificent, as is the exceedingly brilliant and wild scene it accompanies, which I'll get back to momentarily. The cinematography is enchanting. The extensive POVs often taking place in Cliff Booth's convertible really make the viewer feel as though they are a part of the environment, a part of this alternate 1969 Hollywood. Tarantino utilizes a sort of storytelling device here that he used in Inglourious Bastards, the melding of historical individuals and events with creative fiction. Unfortunately, in reality, Sharon Tate was tragically and senselessly murdered. So while Robbie's Tate walks through town, views her own picture in theaters, visits a bookshop, there is this inherent and uncomfortable sense of tension. And there is the jaw-droppingly amazing scene in which Charles Manson's cronies are completely massacred by Cliff Booth and his pooch. For me personally, this is one of the most brilliant scenes in cinema on a number of levels. I also can't think of a single movie theater experience in which I was more floored than I was during my first viewing of these 5 or so minutes. It is the scene to which I alluded earlier, underscored by the QT edit of this classic tune, originally recorded in the mid-ish 60s. It's big, it's powerful, and indescribably fitting. The entirety of this scene is technical perfection. The performances are unhinged and electric. The scene's aura is so wonderfully difficult to describe. It's off the wall and high energy, suitably psychedelic. It is edge of your seat, enthralling and disturbing entertainment. Every single solitary shot is practically inexplicably captivating. Now, allow me to explain my captivation. The juxtaposition of gratuitous violence and inherent satisfaction is something that makes this scene and this picture as special as it is. The gruesome deaths of what were these historical pieces of is turned into this oddly invigorating farce, and I'm quite sure that Quentin is the only filmmaker capable of executing that precise concept with the mastery on display here. Now, I am in the process of integrating myself into this business, with a limited web series being released next year. Entertainment, art, and the process of creating it is my calling, if you like. So I'm always engrossed whenever viewing the inner workings of a film set, Dalton simply running his lines, or Rick discussing the business with directors, co-stars, and such. And Tarantino is notoriously a walking movie encyclopedia, and this particular piece of his is the greatest representative of that fact. This flick is a love letter to old cinema, old Hollywood, and film. There is a fascinating concept on which I believe much of this movie and its characters rest, the line between reality and fantasy, and in the case of nearly every single character in this film, that line is rather blurred. I mean, we're dealing with a great many actors and other artists, and besides this primary group, we focus on a gang of drug-addled, psychotic, and deluded cult members. Who we are, what we do, and what we indulge in dictates the level of alteration and potential warping in regards to our perception of reality. The greatest example of this is a pair of contrasting scenes/sequences, the first of which is actually my favorite few minutes of 2019 cinema. Rick has just muddled up his lines, causing a couple on-set delays, so he storms into his trailer and has a major hilarious meltdown. Dalton kicks hurls a small liquor bottle, weeps, and passionately threatens his own life in the mirror if he doesn't get his shit together. Fast forward to the movie's climax. A tripping on acid Cliff Booth has just physically eviscerated these Manson family pricks. One of them being sent, injured to fucking screaming, running right through the glass of the back door. This wailing cult member interrupting Rick's session of moseying around lazily in his pool. Rick's instinct is to flee to his shed in order to retrieve the same flamethrower prop he used in one of his pictures, the 14 Fists of McCluskey. After burning one of the Manson clan to a crisp, he gets into a conversation with Emil Hirsch's Jay Sebring right outside Polanski/Tate's house, in which Rick refers to his hippie flamethrower antics in this humorously nonchalant nature. A single visual encapsulation of this concept to which I've been referring comes in the form of my favorite individual shot in the picture. It is the one in which Tex Watson directs his weapon toward Cliff, while Cliff, splitting his sides, mockingly points his finger like a gun at Tex, right after asking if all of this is real. This symmetrical and so aesthetically pleasing shot represents reality mirroring fantasy. There's a sort of paradoxical element here of reality influencing fiction and fiction influencing reality. In fact, right before these high and psycho family members entered the Dalton residence, they were blathering about their impending act of violence being motivated by the fictionalized murder seen on TV, for which artists such as Rick are responsible. Now, every decade, or just era in general, consists of at least some corruption, malice, great struggle in some form. But when one thinks of the great majority of 1960s Hollywood, one thinks of peace, love, liberation, and psychedelics. There was this sense of light that was burnt the fuck out by the Manson murders. This horrific event in which this young rising starlet was killed is viewed by so many as the definitive end to the 60s, and the sense of hope that came along with it. What Tarantino does beautifully with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is he keeps the light of the 60s alive. The Manson family's small, sick and twisted victory is snatched away from them, and we see them turned into clowns. All the while, the thriving Sharon Tate gets to continue to thrive, as of course it's Rick's house that is attacked in this story instead of Miss Tate's. All the while, QT concludes our Rick Dalton-centric A-story, which this narrative's inciting incident propelled into motion. In the movie's beginnings, Rick Dalton is a washed-up TV cowboy, whose career is in a bit of a tailspin. Sometime later in the film, Cliff and Rick are entering his residence, as his neighbors are entering theirs. Rick points out to Cliff that sitting next to rising starlet Sharon Tate is director Roman Polanski. This fact lifts Rick's spirits a bit, as he states that one pool party next door could lead to him starring in a Polanski-directed movie. As previously mentioned, following the flamethrower incident, Rick has a discussion with frequent resident of the Polanski Tate house, Jay Sebring, about said flaming hippie incident. Sharon overhears this on the mansion's gate speaker, which leads to her inviting Rick up to the house. The final shot features Rick embracing Tate with a hug before entering the Polanski residence, which was the opportunity he has so passionately desired. This ultimate meeting between Tate and Dalton is another example of the sort of convergence between reality and fiction. This picture is a bit of a masterpiece, in my opinion. It is exceedingly unique. It can be funny as hell, as well as quite tense. It can be simply and subtly engrossing, as well as literally jaw-droppingly shocking. The narrative is so fascinatingly unconventional. I could talk about the themes and concepts contained within this film for hours. Every solitary scene presents so much juicy substance to discuss and dissect. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is this endlessly interesting and immersive experience. It is the crowning achievement of Tarantino's magnificent film career.